The Soviet-Afghan War is often told as a simple story, one of clear villains and heroes. The Soviets invade Afghanistan, imposing their will on a distant land. The United States responds by secretly arming the Mujahideen, sending weapons and supplies across treacherous borders. And, in the popular imagination, freedom triumphs over tyranny as the Afghan resistance pushes back against a superpower. But the truth is far more complicated, and the consequences far more profound. The war was not just a clash of armies, but a collision of ideologies, cultures, and outside interests. Operation Cyclone, the CIA's covert program to arm the Afghan resistance, became one of the longest and most expensive secret wars in U.S. history, stretching over a decade and costing billions. Its goal was simple on paper: make the Soviet occupation so costly, so painful, that Moscow would have no choice but to withdraw. By that measure, it worked. The Soviets lost thousands of lives, billions of rubles, and their military prestige was shattered. The war hastened the collapse of their empire, sending shockwaves through the Soviet Union and the world. But the real cost was paid by Afghanistan itself. Millions of Afghans were displaced, entire villages destroyed, and a generation grew up amid violence and uncertainty. Billions in weapons flooded a fractured society, empowering not just freedom fighters but also warlords and extremists, fueling decades of chaos, civil war, and instability that would ripple far beyond Afghanistan's borders. The U.S. focused on hurting the Soviets, with little thought for what would come after their enemy was gone. There was no plan for rebuilding, no vision for peace. Operation Cyclone stands as a cautionary tale about the dangers of proxy warfare, where outside powers pull the strings, but local people pay the price. It's a stark reminder of the perils of pursuing military goals without a plan for peace, and the human cost of neglecting what comes next. The secret war that was meant to contain one threat ended up creating new ones. Extremist groups and global instability that haunt the world to this day. The legacy of Operation Cyclone is not just a Cold War victory. It's a warning about the unintended consequences of intervention, and the lives forever changed in its wake. The aftermath would reshape Afghanistan, the region, and global security for generations, leaving scars that are still visible today. Understanding this story means seeing beyond the myth, reckoning with the chaos left behind, and learning from the past to shape a better future. Before the Soviet invasion, Afghanistan was already a nation of deep divisions, tribal, religious, and political. Its cities bustled with a mix of modernity and tradition, while the countryside remained largely untouched by change. Tensions simmered beneath the surface as different groups vied for influence and power. The Saur Revolution of 1978 toppled the monarchy and installed a communist regime aligned with Moscow. This sudden shift shocked many Afghans who were unprepared for such radical change. The new government imposed radical reforms, land redistribution, secular education, and women's rights, by force, alienating much of the population. These policies, though intended to modernize Afghanistan, clashed with deeply held beliefs and traditions, especially in rural areas. Rebellion erupted across the countryside. Villagers, angered by the government's heavy-handed tactics, began to resist. Local leaders, clerics, and tribal militias rose up, calling themselves the Mujahideen. They united under a common cause, determined to defend their way of life. Their fight was both political and religious, a jihad against what they saw as a godless, foreign-imposed regime. For many it was a struggle for faith, identity, and survival. Civil war engulfed the country, and the communist government teetered on collapse. Violence spread from remote villages to the heart of Kabul. Desperate, Kabul's leaders begged Moscow for help. They feared losing control entirely as the rebellion grew stronger. Fearing the loss of a client state and the spread of Islamic fundamentalism, the Soviets invaded in December 1979. Their intervention marked a turning point, drawing Afghanistan into the heart of the Cold War. Their arrival turned a messy civil war into a Cold War battleground. The conflict now drew in foreign fighters, weapons, and money from around the world. Afghanistan's fate was now tied to the ambitions of superpowers. The lives of ordinary Afghans became entangled in a global struggle far beyond their borders. The seeds of decades of conflict had been sown, leaving scars that would shape Afghanistan's future for generations to come. The Soviet invasion shocked Washington, President Carter and his advisors saw a chance to bleed the Soviets, giving them their own Vietnam. Covert aid to the Mujahideen began almost immediately, with the CIA tasked to arm, fund, and train the resistance. Operation Cyclone's goal wasn't to win the war for the Afghans, but to make the occupation as costly as possible for Moscow. Under Reagan, the program exploded in scale. Hundreds of millions of dollars, matched by Saudi Arabia, poured into the conflict. The U.S. and its allies transformed a local insurgency into a global proxy war. The focus was on Soviet losses, not Afghan futures. The Cold War chessboard took precedence over the lives of ordinary Afghans. The consequences would be felt long after the Soviets left. To keep U.S. involvement secret, the CIA funneled all aid through Pakistan's Inner Services Intelligence, or ISI. This gave the ISI enormous power over who received weapons and money. Pakistan's priority was its rivalry with India, not Afghanistan's stability. The ISI favored hardline Islamist factions, especially Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, sidelining more moderate groups. The U.S. outsourced political control to a partner with its own agenda. American officers had little direct contact with the Mujahideen, relying on ISI reports. The most radical Pakistan-aligned groups became the best armed and most powerful. This critical flaw shaped the post-war landscape, empowering those least likely to build a stable Afghanistan. The seeds of future chaos were sown by proxy. By the mid-1980s, the war in Afghanistan had ground to a bloody stalemate. Neither the Soviet forces nor the Mujahideen could claim victory, but everything changed dramatically when the U.S. began supplying the Mujahideen with Stinger missiles, a game-changing weapon that would alter the course of the conflict. These portable, heat-seeking weapons allowed guerrilla fighters to shoot down Soviet helicopters and jets with unprecedented ease, neutralizing Soviet air power and shifting the balance of the war almost overnight. Soviet pilots, once dominant in the skies, now flew in constant fear. Aircraft losses soared, and morale plummeted as the Mujahideen's confidence grew. The Stinger's impact was both tactical and psychological, devastating Soviet strategy and hastening Moscow's decision to withdraw from Afghanistan. Meanwhile, the war became a magnet for foreign fighters, so-called Afghan Arabs, drawn by the call of jihad and the promise of glory on the battlefield. Training camps and madrasas, funded by Operation Cyclone and private donors from across the Muslim world, sprang up along the border, turning the region into a hub for militant recruitment and indoctrination. Afghanistan became a crucible for a new generation of militants, hardened by war and united by ideology, ready to export their experience far beyond these mountains. The conflict was no longer just Afghan, it had become a global struggle, drawing in volunteers and resources from across continents. The tools, tactics, and networks forged here would outlast the war itself, laying the groundwork for future conflicts and extremist movements. The seeds of transnational jihad were planted in the mountains of Afghanistan, destined to grow and spread in the years to come. The world would soon feel the far-reaching impact of these fighters and the networks they built, as the legacy of this transformed war echoed across the globe. Relentless Mujahideen attacks and the Stinger missile broke Soviet resolve. Gorbachev signed the Geneva Accords in 1988. By early 1989, the last Soviet troops withdrew. In Washington, it was hailed as a Cold War triumph, but with the Soviets gone, U.S. interest evaporated. Funding dried up, and Afghanistan was left adrift. The Mujahideen, now heavily armed and divided, turned on each other. No plan for disarmament, no roadmap for peace, just a power vacuum. Warlords battled for control, and Kabul was devastated by infighting. The dream of a free Afghanistan died in the rubble. The civil war that followed was even more destructive than the Soviet occupation. The people paid the price for a victory that was never truly theirs. The chaos set the stage for the next chapter of tragedy. The Civil War of the 1990s was the direct result of Operation Cyclone's failures. Billions in weapons, but almost nothing for nation building. Afghanistan fractured further. The ISI's favored extremists dominated, unwilling to share power. Warlords ruled by violence, funded by drugs and extortion. Civilians suffered as Kabul was reduced to ruins. Out of this chaos, the Taliban emerged. Young men from Pakistan's religious schools, promising order and Islamic law. Backed by Pakistan, They swept across the country, capturing Kabul in 1996. The Taliban imposed a harsh, repressive regime, especially on women and minorities. They ended the civil war by crushing their rivals, but turned Afghanistan into a pariah state. The world now faced a new, more dangerous problem, one born from the ashes of intervention. The cycle of violence was far from over. The infrastructure built during the anti-Soviet jihad didn't disappear. It evolved. Foreign fighters, radicalized and trained in Afghanistan, stayed behind. Among them, Osama bin Laden, who transformed his network into Al-Qaeda. With Taliban protection, Al-Qaeda established training camps and plotted global attacks. The skills and networks forged during Operation Cyclone now targeted the West. The line between freedom fighters and terrorists blurred. On September 11, 2001, Al-Qaeda struck the U.S., forcing America back into Afghanistan, this time as an occupying force. The legacy of Operation Cyclone had come full circle. A secret war meant to defeat one enemy had created another, far more dangerous. The world would never be the same. Operation Cyclone is a stark lesson in unintended consequences. Tactical success led to strategic disaster, expelling the Soviets but unleashing chaos. Arming factions without a plan for peace empowered extremists and doomed Afghanistan to violence. The war created a global movement, turning Afghanistan into a university for jihad. Outsourcing control to Pakistan's ISI meant losing sight of the endgame. The illusion of control proved fatal. The choices made in secret echoed for decades, shaping conflicts far beyond Afghanistan. The story is not about blame, but about learning from history. Intervention without vision breeds chaos. The legacy of Operation Cyclone is a warning. Short-term victories can have long-term costs the world cannot afford.